Thank you for being with us this morning. I'm Nina Axelson. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability and Outreach for Evergreen Energy, your host organization for today's virtual panel. I will admit that when we started planning for this sometime this summer, it never occurred to me that we would be in the midst of some of the most lively national debates that I've ever seen. And so more pressure for me as a moderator than I know I've ever experienced, but I'm very grateful that the two guests I have with me today are great colleagues and work tremendously well together. So I will not need to liberally use the mute button during today's conversation. But I'm really excited to get started with everyone today to talk about our transformation in the energy sector. With only a short amount of time, we won't get through everything, but with these two folks, I know we'll cover a lot of ground. I want to encourage you to reach out to Evergreen, to myself, to Ken, to any of the folks participating today, if you have additional questions that we aren't able to cover. If you do have questions during the session, we'd ask that you use the Q&A function. That's where we will look for questions, and we'll sprinkle them in during the discussion today as it fits, and make sure that you have a chance to interact with folks here. There is also a chat function. We'd encourage you to use that if there are any technical difficulties. If at some point you can't hear one of us, or there's any other kind of a challenge with the function of the Zoom webinar, then that's a good place to put those questions. So with that, I just again want to thank everybody for being with us today for this discussion. Evergreen is really proud to be not only a utility service provider, but also part of planning and shaping the next generation of community energy systems and how that integrates with other utility systems. So we really get to have 1 foot square in legacy utility systems that have been doing really great things for a long time, and another foot out into the future and stretching to see what else is possible and what kind of technology solutions and policy solutions and energy solutions we just need to bring to the public and to our partners. And that's why we wanted to have this session today, is really to say, what other conversations can we spark? What other ideas do we need to make sure are being shared with folks so that we can really map out the best version of the transformation possible. So with that, I'd really love to have Ken Smith introduce himself first here as the CEO and President of Evergreen Energy. And then Rao, you could introduce yourself right after him, please.
Well, good morning, everyone. Happy to be with you. It looks like we've got a good number of folks attending today. I'm Ken Smith, the President and CEO of Evergreen Energy. I wear dual hats. I'm also President and CEO of District Energy St. Paul. I've been involved in energy really my entire career, which, as you could tell by the gray hair, has been a number of years. I can't believe it's been in excess of 35 years now. And it's amazing what kind of transformation that we are seeing right before our eyes. And we're going to talk about that today. I'm looking forward to this dialogue with Rao. He and I get together. He's on my board now at Evergreen, but also we just get together and talk about energy and where things are going. And we don't always have the answers, and we're not going to have all the answers today. But hopefully we'll spark some conversation today, and I think I'm looking forward to it. Really, my work right now, some of what is going to inform my comments today is I've been doing a lot of work with an energy exchange between Minnesota and Germany. But I've also traveled to a number of other locations, sites, met with utilities, policymakers, regulators, innovators, that of what they're doing, what their role looks like, and how things are changing and being shaped in the transformation that's underway, both here domestically in the US, but also internationally. And that's going to help shape some of my comments today. And I know Rao brings a very large perspective from his work, both at MISO, but in his work today. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Rao.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Thanks, Nina and Evergreen Energy for allowing me some time here to share some of my thoughts. As Ken mentioned, I was with the MISO, the grid operator here in Minnesota for 15 years. And that has been, a major amount of my work life. Even though I was a consultant before MISO and I'm a consultant now, the grid operator mentality and the wholesale energy market construct is really where I put a lot of faith in and a lot of thoughts in, because eventually I want to see more distributed energy resources connect to the wholesale energy market, and really look at some of these concepts that we might get into, but not just stop at energy market, but look at capacity market and ancillary service markets. And I'm convinced as we go in this energy transition, we would probably need more services in this wholesale energy market. We need to move and compensate these services that are going to be needed in future, because as Ken said, we may not have all the answers, but we know for a fact that we would need, sort of all technologies to be compensated for the solutions that we are looking for in the future. So I'm really excited to share some of my thoughts and have a good, robust panel discussion here. And I would never, jump in, Nina, and cut you off. So please, I'm Minnesota nice.
I've learned that too, Rao, that I don't do that either. So
Ken knows the consequences of cutting me off. So, well, thank you for that introduction. Knowing both of you well enough to know that 2 minutes will never quite encapsulate the immensity of what you know and have experienced, but hopefully that comes through in today's panel for folks. So to be a little bit retrospective first, I've been with Evergreen for 12 years, and we have said quite frequently over the last decade, I can't believe how much change we're seeing. I can't believe how much change we're seeing. The rate, Ken often says, the rate of change is just unprecedented. So we won't look back quite that far because it has been so much change in the last decade, but maybe just looking at back over the last year or two, what things have really struck you? What do you think has changed the most in the way that the energy industry is functioning, growing, delivering services? What stands out to you? And Rao, I'm going to have you go first, please.
Sure. It's one thing to look at change, and I think from a perspective that I'm looking at, one thing that I picked up on change-wise is there is a lot more announcements that are coming up these days on carbon-free goals by 2050, by 2035, by 2030. I mean, most of the folks are looking ahead and trying to have an accelerated pace of this energy transition, because they want to go better, faster, and cheaper, in this transition. So we are seeing a lot more carbon-free or fossil-free announcements coming up, not only from cities, not only from states, but also investor-owned utilities and such. As a result, I think what I am tracking in utility integrated resource planning constructs is a lot more solar showing up in those capacity plans, a lot more distributed generation, distributed solar specifically, not so much wind, but definitely a lot more solar, and a little bit of research efforts thrown in around hydrogen storage, and then as well electrification and such. So what this leads, I think, is, as a recent technical conference that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission had, is as an industry, we're trying to understand or put a price on carbon. And as an industry, we're trying to hone in on that incentive that is going to be in the wholesale market, because we want to have an incentive that effectively dispatches the algorithm in the control room that incentivizes carbon-free resources, which we don't have currently. And that's where I think I'm seeing a major change. And just to put a finer point on some of these aspects, as we look at more carbon-free resources and more distributed generation, the role of aggregators, the third-party aggregators or aggregators in general, which could be universities, which could be healthcare institutions, which could be any other commercial entities, they are really becoming critical. As I was preparing for this, and yesterday I was on a panel that I was the moderator for. And I did not know this. There is a resiliency as a service. And there is a company out there in Texas, old NASA and US Navy guys who are providing resiliency as a service. It's essentially a microgrid. They're providing microgrid services. And so those are the kind of changes that are happening right now. And it's happening really faster than we would expect because it's sporadic, it seems like, but the transition is really fast.
I would pick up on the same thing, Rao, in that it is the decarbonization. In the past 2 years, the conversation has shifted from renewables to decarbonization, which I'm very thankful for because I was always frustrated with, well, let's just talk about getting to 100% renewables or some penetration of renewables. And yet the renewables are a means to an end. They're not the end. The end is decarbonization. And so that we have shifted a conversation from renewables to decarbonization is a very healthy thing in the overall dialogue, because now it forces us to think much more holistically. How do we decarbonize an electric grid? Well, the electric grid is moving very rapidly. But then how do we decarbonize transportation? And certainly there's a lot of conversation around EVs. I've driven an EV for 8 years. And so hydrogen, it looks like hydrogen is going to be a part of that. But then you get to the built environment, whether it is office buildings or residential or commercial or industry. How do you decarbonize that? And in order to decarbonize that segment, we're going to have to move to cross-sector coupling. We're going to have to think about how do we reuse energy, and where you've had these kind of not bright lines. There's always been this intersection between the electric world and the thermal world. And we're both electrical engineers, so working, talking about thermal energy. But in that, there's been this, well, here's the electric world and here's the thermal world. We're going to have to think about how do we leverage renewable energy, clean energy sources, and effectively with efficiency. For example, utilization of heat pumps. So whether we're using a naturally occurring energy source like ground source heat pumps, or we're using some kind of a wasted energy stream, and we've done things like with sewer or with some kind of a processed water. If we're talking about that, leveraging renewable energy or clean energy sources so that we can decarbonize the built environment, that is really a big challenge. And this conversation changing to decarbonization now allows us to look at this market, the challenge that we have before us, in a very different way, much more holistically. And it's going to take a lot of partnerships and collaboration. And as you said, thinking about, well, how do you fill these gaps? There's going to be new services. And so as the electric grid is transitioning and transforming and decarbonizing, this is going to have its own challenges, and we can get into that around storage and so forth. And at the same time, it actually allows some really nice connections between the thermal grid as it's also trying to decarbonize buildings, for example. So I think that is, to me, which is really exciting, is this shift and to decarbonization. The other thing that has done is it has caused us to think about natural gas in a different way. That if we have to decarbonize, the role of natural gas, how much natural gas do we use, and to really drive deep into decarbonizing whether if we're going to get to 100%, well, natural gas is a bridge, but how long is that bridge, and how do we leverage it smartly to a carbon-free future?
Well, if we were trying to prove out the theory that the rate of change is unprecedented, the observations from both of you certainly validate that hypothesis. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, and really on point about just how much the changing and who is leading, who is speaking out, and how things are crossing sectors and technologies in ways we have never seen before is just really great observations. So clearly we recognize that policy making is influencing the marketplace. I'd like to talk a little bit about how you see that working or not working, and what's really been happening that you see as effective. I want to just make mention of two partners we work with, quite a bit. There's the Clean Energy Economy Minnesota here really promoting and advocating for clean energy industry growth and opportunities, and as well as the Sustainable Growth Coalition, both who have one has a toe in, the other is a bit more involved on the policy side. But we see things like that are changing that conversation. But what else are you seeing that you think is effective? What policy changes would you like to see emphasize more? And again, who's doing it right?
I'll go first on this one. Few are doing this right, in part because we think it's static. We worked really hard to get almost perfect policy, but now with the rate of change that we're experiencing, it's very difficult to get policies absolutely right. So I think the conversation needs to shift when it comes to policy as to framework. What kind of frameworks do we work within? And understand that we need to have feedback loops that allow us to adapt and change policy and approach as we're moving through this transformation. So we can work for, and have experienced this personally, years to get policy in place. And that's too slow in this environment. So it's more about putting in place frameworks that allows you to work towards goals. And I would say it needs to be a palette of goals like decarbonization, certain levels at certain time, energy productivity, which many folks know that I'm a big fan of. So what are those metrics that you're going to have? And then are you attaining those metrics, and do we need to adjust policy? So in the time I've spent in Germany, this is one of the things they're doing, and they are undergoing an energy transformation. They are constantly adjusting policy in order to achieve what they've agreed to as targets. They don't always get it right. They acknowledge they're not always going to get it right. So it cannot be a very static environment. And that's whether you're working at a state level or you're working at a federal level, that's part of the challenge here, is that it's so hard to get things done. And that's going to hamper our ability to move. The transition or transformation is occurring faster than we're able to get policy in place. And we have to rethink how we do policy.
Yeah, one thing that as Ken was talking, I was thinking, you know, I've not lived in the US my entire life, but as I live here more and more, I realize we don't have a comprehensive federal energy policy, unlike other major economies. We have state policies, and we have FERC and DOE somewhat. So I focus more on FERC with their recent orders on distributed energy resources and electric storage resources. You know, I mentioned those because there is a significant potential of distributed energy resources that could connect to the grid, and it actually opens up more what I call hybrid resources, for example, right? Solar plus storage, or solar plus CHP, so on and so forth. And the interconnection aspects of it are going to be important as we think this through. So the potential for distributed energy resources and these different technologies to decarbonize is significant, and it's to the tune of, I think, 400 gigawatts, if you will, and that is actually driving, as Ken, you mentioned, Germany and other players in the Europe who have experience with these resources. They have experience with something called distribution system operator, DSO. And so they are entering US markets because they have the experience and the tools, and they're going first to places that you would expect, Texas, California, New York, because there is an incentive there for dual participation models. By dual participation model, essentially I mean you have a leg in the retail electricity market and you have another leg in the wholesale market. So you are able to participate in both markets for the sake of your customer, and the community benefits from it. And there is a component here that, again, I'll bring it back to the aggregator called Community Choice Aggregator. and they are working together, hand in hand with the utility. For example, in, again, California, like with, I think, public safety shutoffs, that's the term they use, where they proactively shut off electricity because they could catch wildfire when the wind is blowing. So the aggregators are working with the utility to make sure their community has power. And this, all this stuff is not only decarbonizing, but also providing more incentives for these new players to work together. And as a result, the marketplace is, I think, moving ahead of the policy in some aspects. And as a result, some who are trying to figure this out are asking the policymakers, to, hurry up. Let's get a rule going here, whereas the market has already moved on, so to speak. So I think, again, I don't know this for a fact, but from what little experience I have in the US, there is always going to be this push and pull within the marketplace and the policy aspects. Yes, some of the policies we might get it right. Some maybe will take a little bit more time.
Exactly. I think you're absolutely spot on, Rao. And part of this is then understanding that we're not always going to get it right, that we're going to need to learn and we're going to need to adapt. And that we have to it's not going to be real time, but it has to get closer to real time as the transformation is occurring. Otherwise, you're going to find markets where, because of how it's structured, it can move forward more quickly and other markets will get left behind. And the transformation will stall out for a time. And then, as you said, the marketplace is demanding it. They're wanting it. The customers are wanting it. And so they're going to come to that pinch point where policy has to change. It has to change to more of a framework. It has to change towards achieving goals. It has to have a feedback loop.
A follow-up to that discussion, Ken, I know you've, our running joke has been you've spent enough time in Germany that we're pretty sure you have a second residence over there, advising them on their great market transformation. But so we know Germany is doing things well, and Rao, you made the observation that the US is lacking what some of the other strong markets have. Where are you seeing, again, people getting it right to allow the market to innovate, deploy, scale at the rate that we need to, both to address climate change as well as to let innovation get to where it needs to in the market?
Raul, you want to take a shot at that?
So Nina, you're asking where are they getting it right? Which markets?
Who should we be emulating?
Boy, I don't want to bring up California.
It's okay. It's safe to talk about California here.
So I think, part of the reason the experiments that Ken mentioned are happening more is somewhat driven by climate, driven by wildfires, driven by hurricanes and natural disasters. That is bringing people together because they're realizing that we need this electricity. We have so much digital devices and everything else connected, but at the same time, we need fresh vegetables and fruit and grocery stores to work and all that. So part of that experience is happening on the East Coast and the West Coast because of those natural events, but also in places like Texas, because there is that, what do you call it? The policy aspect or the driver is more in the state of Texas. They are not under the federal commission, so to speak. So the Public Utility Commission of Texas approves some of those market improvements. The market operator there, ERCOT, has. As a result, even they are realizing that they had big transmission projects in the works and going live here in the past few years because of the wind that they had in the panhandle and so on and so forth. Even they are seeing a lot more solar connect to the grid. Obviously, I think people are moving to Texas because of tax incentives and such. So the population growth is still happening in a place like Texas. And the climate aspect, we may not see really hot weather, but we are kind of seeing a more temperature that is allowing the AC load to kick in, for more than 4 hours during the day. As a result, the stress on the electric grid in a place like Texas is more than in other places. As a result, they're looking at more distributed solutions and trying to incentivize that in the wholesale market. So I think places like Texas, California, New York, to an extent, and other Northeast states are having this experiments happen more faster because of these drivers. And I don't know if they are doing it right, so to speak, because what is right for some may not be right for us in Minnesota, right? I'm also aware of that. So I think there probably are some lessons that we can latch on to and then apply to our context.
I'd like to pick up on that. I think you're right. I agree with you, Rao. But I think the point that you just made about are they getting it right or not, the more we work on decarbonization, the more the solutions have to get localized. So if you're going to decarbonize a campus, for example, or a hospital or whatever that looks like, you have to think about the resources that you have locally available to you. And certainly the grid, as it's decarbonizing, is a resource, but there needs to be other resources that you might potentially tap into in order to improve efficiency. If you're going to recover energy, utilize heat pumps, whatever that is, it's not going to look the same in every location. And that's part of the challenge here. Is it's hard to get policy in place that works universally because the solutions, the closer we get to working on decarbonization at a local level, it'll be different. It's going to look different in a rural community in northern Minnesota than it does in a southern rural community in Minnesota or another state. It's going to look different. And that's part of the challenge here with policy.
Yeah, I hear you. Again, when I hear you say localized or local needs, I'm thinking from a market perspective, we need an incentive. We do have something called locational clearing requirements. These are basically capacity needs that are identified for a specific zone so that they don't rely for 100% on imports. They need to have certain capacity available within the zone. And it happens like we have cases where if they don't have enough transmission capacity to import, then they obviously will not be able to meet the reliability criteria, the 1 day in 10 aspect to it. But these criteria, reliability wise, they are not coming handy right now, right? Because we are modeling. I used to do those models at MISO. We used to look at those 1 in 100-year events that are potentially going to be modeled in those. Now, what do you do when you have these abnormal events, 1 in 100 occurring more and more, and the normal is basically what used to be abnormal before? So we need to model these hydrological conditions. We need to model these events and look at the loss of load and the impact it would have, and potentially assign cost to it. And there is a metric out there called value of lost load. But those are, again, aspects that we still need to consider a little bit more in depth with distributed resources, as well as those zones that have the locational capacity needs. And that's how I'm thinking our processing, Ken, when you are mentioning these local communities and what is available to them. Because I know as a transmission planner, I was not looking at those local needs or as a community, what is available there. When I was planning, I was looking at more at the wholesale level, what is connected to the grid. And as a result, I would suspect some of the planners miss out modeling these local resources that are available. And if we don't reflect those local resources in the quote unquote commercial model at MISO, they won't be able to participate in the market, and they won't be able to be dispatched by the control room operator. And yes, there is a cost to some of those metering and telemetry that needs to happen. And this is probably what Nina would mention. I'm geeking out here, so I would stop there. But I think that's what we need, I think.
I think we would all be remiss if you didn't geek out somehow, but we did have a question come in during that. Could you give a brief explanation of what MISO is for our audience?
Oh, sure. MISO is a grid operator. Essentially, think of MISO as an air traffic controller, right, for energy or wholesale energy. And they don't have a say in Southwest Airlines or American Airlines or Delta, but they want to ensure there is enough capacity to go from a point A to point B. They do that for high voltage transmission. So MISO essentially is the air traffic controller for energy, as well as is a market operator. When you have resources participate like Xcel Energy, who are generating supply, if you will, MISO is the market operator who are matching that supply with the demand. And so demand gets to bid in, supply gets to bid in, and essentially MISO is a non-discriminatory independent market system operator. There's a third function of it as well, which is planning, right? When you look at 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, because MISO has a 50,000 feet level view of the entire system, and it spans 15 states, all the way from Minnesota to parts of Texas, to the east to Indiana, Michigan, and to the west up to parts of North Dakota, South Dakota, and such. So 15 states, it's voluntary. You're not forced to participate. The utilities have seen some benefit in participating in it, because you're essentially having this regional planning done in bulk, if you will, at the 50,000 feet level. And you're also having a non-discriminatory marketplace, because previously the supplier used to call up the load, and they used to do these transactions via phone, so they send their supply over their own transmission lines. Now MISO takes care of the transmission lines, is an independent grid manager of those transmission lines without any preference to the supplier or to the demand provider. I hope that gives you a very high level view of MISO.
That is a wonderful explanation. You somehow made a very complicated entity and their service sound somewhat manageable in what's happening there. We won't have time to fully delve into MISO today, but I will note for those who are looking at long-term grid stability, grid integration, how we get the lowest carbon opportunities into these areas, these system operator aggregators, air traffic controllers, it's a huge area of influence. So if you come to today's session not knowing too much about them, maybe we have Rob back to do just a session on getting to know MISO and why you should care.
It should not be a black box, okay? MISO should not be a black box. We all need to know what MISO is. And there are friendly people like me who work at MISO. They are even, more intelligent, better communicative capabilities, and please don't let MISO be a black box for you.
We have one more follow-up question on this, and then I'm going to move us on to the next question. But could you explain the difference between an aggregator and an LSE load-serving entity?
Sure. Aggregator, well, we'll talk with the load serving entity first. Load serving entity basically has an obligation to serve their load, right? When they have a requirement, I think entities like MISO can set what is called a planning reserve margin requirement, essentially around 10 to 15%, that we need to have a planning reserve set aside, so that if push comes to shove, if there are events that are happening, there is still some capacity that can meet the load. So load serving entity is under a compliance requirement to procure resources to meet their load. And that's essentially the load serving entity function. And these are defined, if you will, at the NERC level. NERC as a electric reliability organization manages some of these requirements that the LSCs have, and LSCs, load serving entities who participate in the market, have their own set of requirements. Aggregators, on the other hand, as the word probably indicates to you, will mix and match different supplies to meet the load, right? If there are demand response aggregators, a company like C Power comes to mind. They'll bundle the AC saver switch programs. They'll bundle other demand response programs like interruptible loads, and they will bid into the market like a New York ISO or a PJM for capacity payments for their demand response programs. There are also aggregators who would potentially take electric vehicle, aggregate the electric vehicle load and bid that into the market, because that could be a demand response product. They could take storage, they could take CHP, microgrids. So an aggregator essentially is looking for bundling different resources and meeting the load, the load serving entity obligations to serve the load.
It's a really good way to look at it as a bundler. And it's
Yes.
bundling together a variety of assets.
Right.
It could be a supply, it could be a demand, and then it's bidding that into the market to meet.
Right. So the onus is on the aggregator to do the measurement and verification,
Right.
get the paperwork, and the regulator, in most cases, the retail regulators or the public utility commissions are the interface with the aggregator to ensure that the aggregator has enough supply to meet the load. That's how it works in states that allow third-party aggregators, or states that have retail choice of electricity.
Thank you. It's a really great way in a very short amount of time to talk about some of these things. I'm gonna flip a few of our questions around just so my panelists know. I'm just gonna change some things. It's nice to slip a little bit back from very intensive technology discussion, and now we're gonna talk maybe the business side of things here for a moment. So as we've already talked about in this session, private businesses are taking a larger and larger role in influencing the market, expressing consumer demand in a way we have not seen before on carbon and energy. This is all a fairly new trend. And then, Ken, I know you love to say that our citizens are participating in that in a very different way as far as the democratization of energy at the citizen level. So let's start on the business side of that for a moment, and talk about, where do you see the biggest emphasis coming? Where do you see the biggest demand on the market? Is it on renewable energy purchasing? Are you seeing it at operational level? Which businesses stand out to you? Just like to hear what your observations are of the private business marketplace right now.
Well, you're certainly seeing this from companies that have large loads like data centers. So you've seen this particularly from the Googles, the Amazons, those kinds of folks that have a significant amount of electrical load, and they want to decarbonize. And so they are driving the market to solutions to decarbonize. And if the market cannot deliver, then they are trying to figure out a way that they're going to do that. And so we're seeing that that's a global phenomenon. It's not just in MISO or any of the other ISOs. It's really a global phenomenon that these companies are saying, our customers, you and I, are demanding that they decarbonize, that they see that as the future. And so they are either trying to get in front of it, or and they just see that as part of their brand, that their brand is they want to lead that. So that's where you're seeing a lot of activity, I think, is really in the in manufacturers, particularly where you have energy intensive, and like I said, the Googles and the Amazons come to mind, particularly around data centers.
Ken, before we move to Rao for this question, as a utility operator and service provider,
Sure.
Can you speak a little bit into how you're getting that direct feedback from the customer base and the systems that you operate?
Well, we get that through surveys. So actually customers, and here in St. Paul, we get that through customer surveys, and we've been doing surveys for decades. And if you look back, it's not that long ago, let's say 10, 15 years ago, customers would say, oh, about 20% would say renewable energy is important to them. It's the other way around now. It's 80% plus are saying this is important to us. And you're seeing that in general. You're seeing people saying, if I have an option, if we can get to cleaner energy sources, whether it's renewables or clean energy sources, carbon is becoming something that folks are concerned about. The climate is something that people are concerned about. And if they can be a part of that solution, if their service provider can be a part of that solution, they want that. They don't necessarily say this is what we want you to do, but they certainly are saying this is important to us and it should be important to you.
Great. Kyle, what thoughts would you add to that?
It's no secret that Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and other companies are doing more on renewable energy. And I think it's a sort of a transformation for them, because initially, as Ken mentioned, they were looking at the data centers, they were looking at power purchase agreements. Most of the data centers that I think Google had at one point were in Iowa, right? Because you could have power purchase agreements there with wind. Now I see the transformation move to a more active role, perhaps, in the wholesale energy markets. They want to have a seat at the table at the RTO stakeholder committee level. They also want to have a more proactive voice in planning, because there are, I can tell you, I don't know the cost of that, what it would be, but it would probably be in billions of dollars. These are network upgrades, meaning these are transmission system improvements that are sitting in generator interconnection projects that have not been executed yet. As a result, interconnection customers, even though they have an interconnection agreement, are dropping out. So Google's and others who are seeing this are concerned because one thing that they have that I don't is significant capital, significant cash balance. As a result, they have the scale to deploy technologies much faster and apply the lesson learned for, say, in a wholesale market construct in New York to Texas in ERCOT. And so they are able to leverage their technological capabilities and their financial outlay for looking at long-term and potentially, having partners so that they can, if they cannot get their say, if you will, in the RTOs, and RTOs cannot keep up with their demands, they are going to go around it. They're going to go around and find solutions that would meet their customer obligations. Because, was it not too long ago that, what was it, at Microsoft or Google, their employees said, we don't want you to have this defense contract with the US government. We have a say in this. So, there are a lot more, I think, influence that Google is seeing from their own employees and customers who are using their products.
And I think before we leave this, I think this culture, if you will, this microcosm of this, we want this as a customer, which is driving change, is really important, because in this energy transformation that is occurring, it's going on right now, there's a feedback loop of what we want for outcomes, but there's going to have to be feedback loops around data. The interconnectedness of the energy system in this transformation is going to be immense. So how a building is performing, how a system is performing on this grid, as we get more distributed generation, as we put on storage, as we try to decarbonize it, we're going to need that. We're going to need these feedback loops, not in that I want to have carbon-free energy, but how I get carbon-free energy. It's going to require some things from the customer. It's going to require access to data. It's going to require feedback loops back from the customers to the variety of energy service providers. in order to actually achieve the outcomes that we're all looking for. That's a big part of this transformation.
And that feedback loop, you have two major industry segments right there, Ken, in that small comment you just made. One is the data piece. That's a whole different trajectory in itself. Third party providing data, your own data, data analytics and all that. The other piece is the flexibility and the control systems, right? That feedback loop comes in through the control systems. And I don't know if you saw this, which caught my eye, really, that this transformation is happening faster is a company called Generac. I think they make diesel generator sets and basically manufacturing and stuff.
They've been around a long time.
They bought Enbala. Enbala is a company that we don't think about usually, but they're a Colorado, Denver-based company, and they do optimization around distributed energy resources. So a manufacturing company bought a distributed energy resource platform, essentially, proves from this transformation that's happening and the marketplace is reacting because they're looking at potential partners to play in this and finding, oh, maybe we don't have the technology we should, because our customers are going to need it. We already have the asset, physical assets. Now we need the platform to make it happen.
That's right.
That's wonderful. So I said I was going to modulate us here between the techie and the non-techie. So we're going to swing back into the more technical discussion. So if we're going to really energy nerd out, what technologies are you most excited about? Which things have you started to see proven out in the market that gives you some hope that both as a citizen and as a energy nerd that you're really excited about? And I'm just going to make this plug because if these things are not coming to bear in Minnesota, we obviously are regional partners and national partners, but it's really interesting as we look at if all the examples come from California and New York and Texas, maybe the next conversation is what else do we need to be making sure we're paying attention to in Minnesota as well. So, but the real question is what are you excited about? Rao, do you want to go first?
Sure. I actually will give you an example that I'm excited about right here in Minnesota. Great River Energy, GRE, announced an agreement with Farm Energy. I think that's a company name that grew out of MIT labs or some funding from Bill Gates. The exciting part about it is it's 100 hours storage that they are going to pilot. And that's really exciting because it leads to this thread that we need more long duration storage, not just 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. We need 8, 10, 12 and more storage because as one would expect, from a storage perspective, we're thinking about snowstorms. We're thinking about our winters here in Minnesota, right? There used to be a point in time when I was working at MISO and I was still shoveling snow on my driveway at 4 or 5 a.m. I was thinking, why don't recruiters call me now? Right? But I have past that I've made my peace with Minnesota snow. But Minnesota snow winters could be something that bother people who have storage solutions, and they're thinking 2, 4 hour, 6 hour batteries. Whereas, with the GRE's long duration storage, potentially that could unlock other opportunities for utilities here. Additionally, something that I'm tracking that we already mentioned is hydrogen storage and the capabilities of hydrogen storage, because when we have more renewables on the grid, we are going to have negative pricing. That is a given. Negative pricing essentially means the grid operator is paying them, money instead of they're receiving money because they need to generate no matter what. And there are certain resources like fossil or nuclear that cannot ramp up and ramp down, move up and down pretty quickly compared to the demand. And so we would need, some sort of mechanism in place to store all that excess energy, and that is going to lead to negative pricing. As a result, you can, instead of dumping that energy or curtailing them, you can use it to store in hydrogen. There are others that I think financiers like Bill Grass and others are putting more money in, like Energy Vault. It's like a bricks. You put concrete blocks and you store energy in concrete blocks, and then you take energy from concrete blocks. Then there is concentrated solar power like technology, which uses more mirrors. So there are new technologies that are coming up that essentially hit the nail on the head in terms of not only long duration storage, but also aspects of storage technologies that we don't normally think about. We are more focused on battery right now, but I'm sure there are other technologies coming on the horizon.
If I can ask just a quick follow-up on that one, Ro, because it was part of the Q&A question, and I think hydrogen is emerging in more and more conversations. We hear it on the vehicle conversation, we hear it in the natural gas end use, system decarbonization conversations. So could you just give a little glimpse of where hydrogen is emerging, and is storage the place where it's going to have its best showcase, or is that to be determined?
I think part of it, where hydrogen is emerging is in states that are having a mandate on something called green electrolytic hydrogen. Essentially, they're trying to ensure this excess renewables is not just curtailed, trying to ensure there is a sink for that excess renewables, because it's a big problem in places like California when they have so much sun during the day, midday, and not enough demand, because the demand is mostly peak demand, mostly in the 8 p.m. or after the sun sets hours. There is another aspect that is driving hydrogen penetration more in our country, which is a realization that Ken mentioned, right, about transportation. Transportation sector, especially long duration, like trucks. I know there is a bad name associated with the Nikola right now with the S-Pack and stuff, but that's a viable model if you think about long distance trucking industry. And they want to decarbonize too, right? And they want to ensure they have reliability in their industry, because they have to go from point A to point B, and they can't just rely on Tesla battery, for example, that has a range of, let's say, 350 miles. So hydrogen is a play there, especially because, as I understand, the pumping stations and the infrastructure that we have for gas and natural gas right now can also be used for hydrogen. So there is a leveraging of that pipeline infrastructure for hydrogen that provides a little bit more I think diversity for us. Natural gas can be converted into hydrogen, renewables can be converted into hydrogen. That's where I think hydrogen is coming into play.
Yes, you see that we mentioned Germany earlier. So Germany, that's part of their strategy as well, is that you can actually use your existing natural gas infrastructure to blend in hydrogen. Right. So you could blend it into natural gas at some percentage and not have to really change anything. Again, as part of the transition, it's not the end, but it's a way to start moving towards that. I think on the same question, Nina, to me, the technologies I get excited about are those that facilitate the integration. And so where you're going to have this integration between, particularly in the built environment, between electric and thermal. And so that's the technology. Storage is absolutely among them. Long-term storage, and there's lots of ways to do long-term storage, certainly with, water, for example, and we do that now. One of the technologies I saw not quite a year ago was chemical storage. They were actually taking excess electricity and storing this energy in a chemical compound that they were able to release with water and generate 400 degrees. And so they could get steam if they wanted to use that to generate electricity, or they could generate and put it into district energy systems, for example. And so that was a pilot that I saw in Germany that was in place. So things like that allow us to store a lot of energy for a long period of time that facilitate integration of our systems that lead to decarbonization. Again, the overarching goal. Those are the things that I get really excited about, because that's what's going to need to unlock to get to the solutions that we need. Then the other part of it is around data. I think artificial intelligence will be a big part of this. And as we mentioned earlier, the feedback loops that we're going to need to have in order to have the data, to have the intelligence, to make the right decisions, whether it is first people or is completely automated, it's going to take those feedback loops. And so that's another area that I watch.
So I'm not surprised at all that an hour with the two of you goes by way too fast. I think I only got through half of my questions just because there's so much great dynamic between the two of you on these topics. So really, really thank you for that. Rao, I know you need to go. Would you like to leave us all with some wisdom or parting encouragement, a call to action?
Hey, I'll tell you this. I think people like Ken, who are leaders, who are integrity, and they have the foresight to look ahead. We need them more, right? Because we need people who encourage diverse point of views. And I don't know how Ken remembers this discussion we had, but at one of the events when I was at MISO, maybe Great Plains Institute or Environmental Initiative had an event, and I talked to Ken about distributed energy resource participation, and Ken remembers that. I don't know how he did that. So all I would say is I don't have the wisdom to tell you, but I do think we need to encourage more diverse resources. We need to encourage all options on the table so that we don't get into one corner and think that is the future, right? I think as a holistical system perspective, we need all actors. I know, Nina, we didn't talk about equity. I know that's close to your heart. And I didn't realize equity and consumer advocacy when I was at the ISO. So, we need to think about these aspects and bring to the table different voices. And I think kudos to you, Evergreen Energy, Nina, Ken, for bringing somebody like me, just to share my thoughts. I appreciate it, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rao. And if you need to drop off, we wish you well with the rest of your day, and we're very, very grateful. I hope as this series continues, we could have you back, because I feel like we've just tapped into the beginning of this conversation, even though you offered us so much today. So thank you. We're so lucky to have you as part of our board.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Rao. It was fantastic.
So,
thank you.
Ken,
Yes.
as you get the spotlight to yourself now for a moment, same question for you. This is such an amazing time to be in this work, even when it's hard. What would you like to share with the group before we sign off here?
Well, this week I was facilitated a panel. We were talking about sustainability and innovation, and one of the speakers mentioned that really this triple bottom line, and there's been this idea of a triple bottom line for some time, but she said that it's economy or economics, it's environmental, and it's equity. And I thought that was a really great way to say that. And as we talk about a transformation of a system that will affect every single person, we can just talk about the US if you want to, a North American market, it will affect every single person, every single business, every single home, every single community. The solutions that we bring are going to have to think about the needs for those individuals. It cannot be just what happens in the big cities or on a campus. You have to think about rural. It can't be just about the companies that have the balance sheets and the capital. You have to think about the small businesses as well. So as we are working on a decarbonization of a system, it's all hands on deck. And there's going to be lots of gaps and opportunities that emerge as a result of this. You've got the big utilities, their business models are going to have to transition. Companies like ourselves, our business model is going to have to transition. There's going to be innovation, there's going to be opportunity, and we need to bring every good idea to the table and flesh it out and make sure that we have participation by all, because it will affect all. The last thing I would say is it's important, I think, that we think of this as not a transition. That word gets put around this, is that, well, we're in the midst of a transition. No, we really are in the midst of a transformation, one like we've never seen, and at a speed that it's actually accelerating. You know, the Germans call it the Energiewende, and when it gets translated, people say, well, that's the energy transition. No, it's not. It actually means energy turnaround. That means go a completely different direction than the direction you're going right now. And so as we think about a system that's under transformation, it's really important that we set goals, and you're seeing that happen now at the community level, at states, at businesses saying, we are going to do this, knowing that we do not know exactly how we're going to get there. And I think that's an important consideration in this, is understand we are in the midst of a transformation, and we're going to need a lot of good ideas in order to get there. And I'm proud to be at a company that is filled with great people, because that's where our good ideas come from, are from people. And so I encourage folks to get engaged, to understand and think about how can they actually be a participant in this transformation in their home and in their community.
Thank you, Ken. What a wonderful thought to end with. It makes me think of our long-standing time working together, that you used to joke that you were a recovering engineer. And I would say that you are just the next generation of engineer who really understands the humanity and the need to have great people and more room for ideas, not less. And I'm very grateful for that within the way that you lead our organization and with what you've shared with us today. So thank you for ending with such a human thought on a technical topic. So thanks everyone for being with us today. We will have the recording published out hopefully next week. If you wanted to share, or if you just thought it was so much fun, you want to watch it again, we welcome that as well. And then don't hesitate to reach out to anybody on our team if you'd like to talk a little bit more about how what we talked about today is influencing the projects and opportunities Evergreen is working on. Thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic day.